attention. The propaganda's a win, stress feeding on my tension. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words upon now, it's made with good intentions.
Welcome to 10200, the Media and Politics podcast for Aotearoa. We are talking about a whole bunch of international stuff today. That's where a lot of the news has been happening. Trying to draw some links back to what's happening here in this country. I'm joined by my co-hosts. Ginny, how are you doing?
Could be worse.
Hey, always great to be at that point.
Yeah. It's only up from here, everyone.
Okay. And Josephine, how are you doing?
Good, everyone. I'm all right. I don't know. We are living in the age of hyper-imperialism. I mean, I've just started using this term hyper-imperialism because that's how I'm seeing it at the moment. It's like there was this interesting term used by an anti-imperialist scholar called Nina Farnia from Iran, and she used the word the autumn of the empire. But I think the autumn also signifies that big blaze before it goes out. And we are in an age of hyper-imperialism, and it does affect a lot of our well-being. And so, yeah, I think I'm affected. But apart from that, hopefully I can, continue struggling against it.
Hey, look, that's all that we expect of anyone, right? Yeah, I've been describing maybe since the first Trump presidency, this era as being an extinction burst for imperialism and fascism. And it just becomes more correct, I think. Obviously, a lot to play out in terms of what shifts occur as people do struggle enough that change happens, right? But that's a long way in the future, I think. Or perhaps not. Perhaps it's sooner than we think.
Perhaps not. Perhaps it's in our lifetimes.
Let's go. So you've just come back from Cuba, Josephine. For those of you who haven't heard it yet, we released an episode earlier in the week with Josephine and Karen Kelly talking about Josephine's trip to Cuba, and also talked about Venezuela during that. It's a really great listen. Go back and listen to it if you haven't. If you just usually tune in for current events, that one's on the podcast apps as well. But since that was recorded, because it was recorded like a week and a half ago, I think, things have got like way worse for Cuba. As Marco Rubio has kind of, alongside his strategy, I guess, for Venezuela, has just been brute forcing what I think are pretty easy to describe as genocidal sanctions against the Cuban people. Do you want to give us a quick run through of like how that's escalated, even just in the time since you were there, Josephine?
Yeah. So what we're seeing happening with the U.S. policy I'm going to say the larger Caribbean, Latin American region is almost like a multi-pronged strategy to attack not just the Bolivarian revolution in Venezuela, but by doing that also fracture the Cuban revolution as well. So it's like two birds with one stone. If you think about the history of Cuba, so the revolution was in the year 1959. And in the period after the revolution, obviously, the United States, puts embargoes on Cuba, as it does with any socialist state anywhere in the world, or you don't even have to be a socialist state. You just have to nationalize your resources, be a resource-rich region in the global south, and nationalize your resources. They will impose sanctions on you. They will impose blockades on you. So since the 1960s, Cuba's under embargoes. During that period, the Soviet Union supported Cuba. And then after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, which, by the way, Ted Cruz described as a successful regime change operation by the United States. So, the Soviet Union didn't just collapse. It was actually, concerted effort since 1917 until 1991 by the, global capitalist imperialists to destroy it. I digress, but...
People forget that Putin was like a darling in the West for years.
Well, he tried to bridge, the divide. But anyway, so thinking about Cuba, so since 1991 to 1999, Cuba went through this phase called the special period because they didn't have that trusted ally anymore, which was Soviet Union. And then in 1999, an important geopolitical incident happens in Cuba's neighborhood. That is the Bolivarian Revolution. Hugo Chavez comes to power in Venezuela in 1999, and then he ushers in this constitution with huge public consultation, by the way, which, contrary to Western narratives, expanded democracy to the grassroots of Venezuela. And so this Bolivarian revolution became a close ally and a staunch supporter, supporting the people of Cuba, because Cuba is an island and it's not like a mineral rich island. It needs support from the outside world, just like any normal country does. We need to have trade. We need to exchange goods and services in order to survive. So Venezuela came into that role, and Cubans call the Venezuelan state the sister revolutionary state of Venezuela. And so now, when Trump kidnapped Maduro, but it's not just the kidnapping of Maduro, it's like a slew of hybrid warfare against Venezuela over 25 years, really. But its culmination was the kidnapping of Maduro. So that really, and also the hijacking, USA did committed a top act of piracy by stealing Venezuelan oil on the way to Cuba. So this was in December 2025. And then after that, the kidnapping happens. And then we can see that basically what's happened in Venezuela at the moment, we have Delcy Rodriguez as the acting president, while Maduro is in the prison in New York or something. Basically, they've lost sovereignty over their oil. And now the United States companies, corporations are operating in that region. They're not able to send oil to Cuba. Instead, recently they sent oil. US companies sent oil from Venezuela to Israel. Now you can see, you can connect the whole puzzle now. Why they want to get rid of Chavez and Maduro is because they were not servicing the empire. They were servicing the resistance against the empire, and this was unacceptable. So, yeah, so situation in Cuba was pretty, um, in the sense that there was a scarcity, very marked scarcity of supplies, especially of fuel. So, and you can see that the Cuban electricity grid is very heavily reliant, unfortunately, even now, on fossil fuels, although the solar energy is slowly growing with some agreements with China at the moment, but it's not fast enough, so they're still reliant on oil. And so this has put a huge impact on every sector, right? Cuba has an excellent agricultural sector, innovative agricultural sector, but in order to transport, the produce, the seeds, and all these things, they do need fuel. They need fuel for power. So just being in Cuba, I could feel how energy sovereignty is really at the core of sovereignty. So when we are imagining an actual sovereign state, Tinuranga Tiritanga, we must always think about energy sovereignty. And that was a key lesson I got from being in Cuba at the time. Is that this wonderful people, right? This wonderful state, which has unbelievable achievements, really, under the circumstances in the Caribbean, being strangled because it is, hasn't developed that energy sovereignty yet. So yes, the Cuban people at the moment, the embargo and the sanctions have skyrocketed. One of the key steps in strangulating Cuba to this intense level was Trump's adding of Cuba into this list of state sponsors of terrorism. So when Trump came to power in 2016, he immediately, very soon after that, he added Cuba into the list of state sponsors of terrorism, which means that no company anywhere in the world, if they want to do any trade with Cuba, it's really difficult. There's a lot of legal entanglements. So Cuba has been really deprived of vital supplies, whether it's fuel, whether it is like syringes for their amazing health system, which they built there, right? They produce a lot of the medicines themselves, but the raw materials, a lot of the supplies need to still come from outside. So when I was there, I became aware that the medical system is really struggling. So yes, it is genocidal if it continues in this level. So just as we had flotillas to break the siege in Gaza, we need to have flotillas to break the siege in Cuba at the moment. That's the level. I was in an apartment with overlooking the Havana port, and I couldn't see many ships at all coming into this country of 11 million people. So it is quite concerning, and it just leaves a sense of anxiety and worry in my heart thinking about this situation continuing. But I heard the news that Russia is announcing that perhaps they will send some oil to Cuba, and I hope this is true, and that would be really necessary at the moment there.
Yeah, because as well as Venezuela, Mexico has looks like it's been blocked from sending anything as well, right?
Yeah.
This is like, you're talking about hybrid warfare and economic warfare alongside the attacks on Venezuela with the kidnapping of Maduro. But it's not a single country target. This is happening across what Trump is calling like the US sphere of influence, right? They're reigniting oil imperialism, something which they have used more overtly over the last 100 years at different times to control, and and the UK has as well to control
Yeah.
other nations and to remove their energy sovereignty.
Mm.
Like Iran's another example, right? And like some of the things happening in Iran also flow back into what's happening in Cuba and Venezuela right now.
Absolutely.
It's about sphere of influence. It's about the US showing might is right. And it's actually pretty simple to understand that they're doing this purely as a wounded hegemon, lashing out and trying to maintain their status and leaning on their old tools, rather than a range of the soft power tools that they've developed over the last 5 or 6 decades.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a good point there that you brought up, Kyle. What's happening with Mexico? Because Venezuela was a key ally, but Cuban state also had contracts with Pemex, which is a Mexican oil producer. And basically what the United States has done is just so when I was at the University of Havana, well, one of the speakers was an expert on sanctions and embargo, the legal aspect of it, and she helps the Cuban state and Cuban industries try to navigate this in order to gain basically raw materials and things like that. So she talks about how, since the 1960s when the embargo was first imposed, she shows a graph of, how these, it's not just an embargo, it comes with slew of legal entanglements. And Cuba, has to deal with these entanglements, trade entanglements, legal entanglements around sourcing, for example, raw materials. And so when Trump came into power, you can see that there's a huge spike in these legal entanglements that Cuba has to deal with, and this state sponsor of terrorism naming has been one of the key things that they've used to strangle Cuba. But also, right now, Trump is using his tariff mechanism to further strangle anyone that is trading with Cuba, even if that is a state to state kind of cooperation. And that's how Cuba used to overcome a lot of the problems, was through sovereign state to state agreements rather than through industry to industry. And so with these increased tariffs, even that is being curtailed. So we're seeing Mexico, which was giving some oil to Cuba, hasn't been able to after the kidnapping of Maduro. And the kidnapping of Maduro leaves a very chilling effect on the whole of the Latin American region, on what the United States, how brutal and ruthless the United States is, and how its allies just keep quiet and watch it. They're not going to say anything. You know, the United Nations is not able to do anything. Their powerful allies are not saying anything. So basically, it's a lawless world where the United States is still the hegemon. It is a declining hegemon, but it has still, we must remember, over 1,000 military bases across the world, largest military network, huge trillions, I don't know, 3 trillion budget for the Pentagon. It's astronomical what they're putting into their military, because that's all that's left. They've lost hegemony in terms of global production as an economic, powerhouse. It's lost hegemony in terms of being an influence, a moral influence, which they tried to build through, I
That
don't
one's been
know.
going out the window for a while.
Yes. So this is the only thing that they've left, is this brute military force. And it's still, we are living in a material world. It's good to go back to that materialist analysis of how military hardware, military bases can have, power over countries that are trying to be sovereign. So at the moment, you see, Mexico is sending humanitarian aid, but they're not sending oil, which is what Cuba needs at the moment, is oil. So yeah, it's something that we need to watch. It's basically what I've felt when I was in Cuba is that I learned that the embargo also affects building materials, right? So you can see these housing in Cuba, which is completely public, right? So I think 95% of people have homes. It's homelessness is negligible. I couldn't even see homelessness, and I came through to Cuba through Canada, avoiding the United States for reasons
Good
I don't
choice.
need. But when I was in Canada, I spent some time in Vancouver, and Vancouver, there's just homelessness, very visible homelessness, and also the fentanyl crisis has crossed the border into Canada, so you can see people kind of overdosing on the streets. And you see that this is the decay at the heart of the empire. And then you come to Cuba, which is being strangled for 65 years, and it still, has those basic needs being met. There's no concept of rent in Cuba.
The dream. Yeah, you say like the US allies and etc. are keeping quiet, but that's almost like the best case scenario, right? Because in many cases it's not just that they're keeping quiet, it's they're actively aiding and abetting some of this stuff. And you talked about the state sponsors of terrorism move by the first Trump administration. And it's part of why prescription of groups as terrorists or falling in line with the US on their terrorist denunciations has always been a massive red flag for me. Even like you even see it in left-wing circles and in left-wing political parties, right? Where they'll go, oh yeah, we have to prescribe this group that is member of or like an apparatus of this particular state. And you're like, but where does that come from? And what are the actual impacts of that?
Hmm.
And to like half shift the conversation here, you saw this happening in the UK with the Palestine Action protest group being proscribed, right? It turns out it was at the direct asking of Albert Systems, which is one of the military hardware companies that directly produces and sends arms to Israel. And for a few months, we had like these images of often, pensioners sitting down holding a sign being brutalized by police for not even like being part of Palestine Action, just for saying I support Palestine Action, and things along those lines, just like several levels away from the initial claim. It was purely about punishing dissent. And governments across the West are very happy to do this. We've just seen it in the last week in Australia as well. They invited Isaac Herzog, the president of Israel, to Australia.
Shame.
Shame, under the justification that it was to do with the Bondi terrorist attack, which is
Which is
just,
ridiculous.
which is
That draws direct
ludicrous.
links to Israel. Like it's actually so ridiculous for them to be doing that. To backtrack their narrative that it has nothing to do with Israel, to then invite like basically a head of state there is actually insane.
Yeah. And even going to the extent that, and we've seen this across the West since 2023, increasing as well, promoting anti-Semitic tropes themselves. I think Albanese described Herzog as the leader of the Jewish people or something, and
Wow.
they should be allowed to have their leader come and visit. And you're like, so
Insane.
you're heavily conflating Israel and Judaism. That's
Yeah.
anti-Semitism, bro.
Yeah.
And just
Mm.
the way the narrative has been developing at the political level there is just completely cognitively dissonant. The politicians in charge of the crackdown, the abuse by the police in Australia have all been justifying it still a week out. They are saying, "Oh, protests were violent" or whatever. A bunch of the media has been saying like protesters in a clash with the police, and anyone who's seen the videos has just seen these police people just run up and start beating like random protesters. But spinning back, like this is how this stuff operates, you know?
Mm.
This is force projection onto the populaces of Western countries to crush dissent over what's happening at the geopolitical level. We
Mm.
can't see it as in any other way if we're going to be serious about how to strategize it, about stopping it, because you don't even need a base like a US military base necessarily in your neighborhood, right? The
Yeah.
apparatuses of state force are wedded to this ideology as well. And
Mm.
they're led by governments whose decision makers, whose politicians are so far removed from their voters now that you can basically get the US saying like, "Oh, this thing is a terrorist," and multiple Western countries will start beating their citizens up for it.
Yeah. Ginny, do you want to go?
Well, I mean, Carl said a lot of what I've already thought about the protest, but what I thought was especially galling was like the way that the media football around the protest stuff currently has completely shifted into Tony Abbott and people who have personally attacked Tony Abbott. I'm using air quotes for this because I don't know how you could attack a man that foul and gross and grotesque. But I've seen the past maybe 48 hours or so, all the articles are now basically about Tony Abbott's feud with a former Australian of the Year. Apparently, she's been inciting violence just by essentially criticizing the way that the police have conducted themselves around all this and by mentioning Gaza at protests. So she's apparently been trying to import violence, directly quoting him, import violence into Australia, which I think is actually really, really ridiculous because he has been caught on tape, on video, on interview, encouraging the Australian police force in Sydney to use tear gas and rubber bullets against protesters if necessary. I think we should think about that for a second. And
Mm.
if he is going on TV and crying, "Oh, poor me," these people that cared about Gaza, just by mentioning it, are importing violent rhetoric. He wants people to be shot with rubber bullets. He wants violence to be used against Australian communities and protesters. The dissonance that the media has had in reprinting these comments wholesale, also from staff, by the way, reprinting these comments wholesale and reporting it as if he is the wronged party here, is completely irresponsible. It's
Yeah.
completely irresponsible. And I struggle so much with stuff, and I'm gonna call stuff out by name. I know just every single episode I'm on and I hate stuff. But I just can't stand the way that they write about this visit from Herzog. Like, essentially, this entire article that I've read on stuff as of a couple of days ago, the headline, already galling, former Australian PM Tony Abbott praises police who punch Sydney protesters. First of all, insane headline, by the way. Why are you leading with that? It must be terrible SEO. And then three paragraphs down the page, it goes, visit intended to show solidarity and love. Sorry? Solidarity and love?
Wow.
What are we doing here? as a country? What are we doing here printing this stuff in association with the Associated Press? Completely irresponsible, completely contrary, I think, to most of middle New Zealand or most of New Zealand's opinion on Israel and also what's happening in Gaza. And I just hate that we're using this, our country, our media are using this as like a way to basically like launder Tony Abbott's good political reputation. Like we're saying, yeah,
Of all
man,
people.
we agree with this. You were totally subject to violence when someone said the word Gaza at a protest around you. I just can't believe it. And I know that things have been wrong with our media for a long time. I used to work in our media, I understand. But it's just, I feel like we went fully mask off last year and we're heading deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into like Fox News territory in New Zealand, where you just really can't rely on any sort of accurate reporting from any news outlet about foreign affairs, about international affairs any longer. And it's
Mm.
really quite distressing.
Yeah, and I don't know if I think that I wasn't here, all my life, but I would imagine that the media here would have aligned with, the empire, the whole
Mm,
for its entire history. I mean, the state definitely did. This is a settler colonial state that was aligned with the British Empire, and then with the rise of the U.S. Empire, we got aligned with the U.S. Empire, 1953 or something, 1956. In the 50s, we joined the Five Eyes.
mm,
So this is like after the coup against Mohammed Mossadegh, the secular social democratic leader in Iran who, stood for energy sovereignty and social democratic reforms, was
mm,
removed by, the US intelligence and British intelligence. And a few years after that, we were like, yeah, we're going to join this group of bullies. But yeah, to Kyle's point there about, how the state apparatus operates on behalf of the US empire. Yes, that's true. But also, there are US military bases in,
But
in
yeah, but also on top of
Australia.
that, there's this material existence
yeah.
of these military bases nearby. Yeah.
Yeah, and also basically Australia is like, this massive aircraft carrier for the United States in the South Pacific. It's like they're part of AUKUS. They're part of this whole, raising tensions in the Pacific against for a confrontation with China. And it's also fascinating how someone like Anthony Albanese has just buckled
Mm,
under pressure. Like the only thing that they had, the even a very the least amount of courage to just recognize the state of Palestine conditionally, not even unconditionally. They have conditions on their sovereignty. And based on that, Zionists are making this narrative that, this state of Australia is anti Semitic and it's opposing Israel. There's no evidence of this. Australia's always stood with Israel, and here is the best example.
I thought you were going to say
After
Australia's always been racist. This is just
yeah.
it has,
this
of
is just part of
course.
that. It's
Yeah.
normal.
Exactly. It's the same system, right? It's the genocide of the indigenous people there, and the alignment with Israel. These are connected. This is the global. I like to call it the global imperial system rather than just
Mm,
simply calling it imperialism, because the nature of imperialism has shifted since the Second World War. So until the Second World War, there was actually inter-imperialist crises and wars. So the world wars, for example, were imperialist powers fighting each other for dominance over their colonies, right? Germany and France and UK and all that. But after the Second World War, what scholars like Samir Amin um, um, or even Claudio Katz, who's a Argentine leftist scholar, Marxist scholar, he sees that after the Second World War, these imperial core nations, so Western Europe, the United States, and Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Israel, they've acted like a bloc. So under the leadership of the United States. So this is why we see these connections happening. So they overthrow Maduro, then they take Venezuelan oil and give it to Israel to fund the genocide in Gaza. We have a terrorist attack against Jewish people in Sydney. Then they invite Israel to come here to, it's this is the imperial system that's headed by the United States, and Israel is a prominent part of it. So what Cuba is doing, what Venezuela is doing, what we are doing by struggling against the genocide is actually challenging the empire. And I'm going to say this here. Those protesters, they belong to the most important movement that we are living through in this moment, which is the anti-imperialist moment, because the biggest threat to people and the planet as we speak today is the United States empire. We see how New Zealand government has buckled to their pressure, quadrupling the defense budget over the next so many years.
And same prices as well. I want to be really clear about that. Like paying more for less than other allies. It's purely
Crazy.
just a like, hey, we're your servants kind of bribe.
Yeah, FBI office in Wellington, and now this
Mm.
new LNG terminal.
We'll get into that in a bit more detail because it's actually
It's cooked.
yeah,
It's actually
it's
so cooked.
so cooked. There's just no way anything adds up there. But I just wanted to
Yeah.
quickly, before we move on to that, go back to Palestine Action because they've just had a court case at the High Court in the United Kingdom that ruled that the government ban was unlawful and disproportionate,
Woohoo!
which
Well
is
done.
which is great. Like it shows that some of the institutions still aren't like totally tied to this imperialist ideology and like state apparatus rollover, right? But it also shows that the institutions that liberals and maybe center leftists and even a lot of leftists still believe can make a difference, and do still respond. I do want to be clear. So the High Court, the courts in the UK, the judiciary in the UK has responded to this overreach of the state, but it's too slow. Like the institution is, as far as the attacks on civil society, they are not able to respond fast enough. And often, as well, the moves being made by the people in power are to disestablish and undermine any institution that is going to get in their way. And that both has a chilling effect, but also under-resources them to the extent that they can't do things like this. In the UK and other countries that aren't New Zealand, there is enough history and enough bureaucracy that is a lot harder to do. Like there are enough people that some things can keep ticking along. In a country like ours, where they've cut what, 10 to 15,000 public service jobs, those don't really come back, except with like a massive political change. A tax on the judiciary is like 7 people. No, I mean, I'm obviously exaggerating. But the chilling effect is easier to implement, and control over institutional points of power or nodes of power is much, much easier to enforce and maintain. I mean, you can just look at the way that media institutions, basically in lockstep since 2023, have been pro-genocide, both in terms of the propaganda that they are publishing in favor of Israel, but also just the way they've ignored it by and large. They've ignored the genocide. They just don't report on it. That's an easy way to get out of it.
Yeah,
Um, and it's
it's just
because there are like 4 or 5 big media outlets, and all you
Mm.
need to do is say like have the people in charge of those, the editors, the owners, say, oh, I don't think we should. It's not giving us good clicks. There's plenty of ways to justify it, which don't have them writing in an email, "Hey, we're pro-genocide." You say, "Oh, I don't think audiences want that." Oh, we need to be balanced is another good one. And it's not that one or two did this, and it's not that they all did it. They all did it together. It's just that easy to control narrative in this country because we're so small, and the people making decisions are such a minute cohort who all talk to each other. And they all do hang out with each other, and they don't have to do it in back rooms. They're at the Northern Club, they're at the Wellington Club. They're just having a drink together at any given time. Journalists are just turning up and going like, "Oh, I'm having a line of Coke with David Seymour or something," and that's why he's so friendly to me all the time. And
Mm.
I have to run his propaganda because of that. It's really, really easy for people who are motivated to control the way things work in this country. It's just a fact. And I
Mm.
think we really do ourselves a disservice if we just hand wave that away as, oh, that's just a conspiracy theory. Because we're seeing it happen in real time. Like, you can make
Mm.
a really clear case for it just on the outcomes of what we're seeing in discourse and political action and political moves, and especially with this current national coalition government, where there are the direct links between the ACT Party and big business and global business and New Zealand First and the same and lobbyists, etc. And then the National Party just goes, we do this, we do that. So big win for Palestine Action in the UK. It's showing that
Can I just make one more point about the
absolutely.
media? Because I was watching ABC and how they were covering the protests, and I was like totally disgusted by the way that they did it. They were treating Isaac Herzog as a normal leader. Their questions to him were so pathetic. Like, they had nothing to ask about the genocide in Gaza, which has already been called a genocide even by Israeli groups, and nothing about that, nothing about why is it that Israel needs to be the leader of Jewish people everywhere. Where they don't ask any of that. So it's like, to me, this, and also you mentioned New Zealand media and how terrible they are. It's, I don't think it's only, and all the things you said is right, Kyle. It is like a small circle and all that, but ultimately it's linked to the economic system that we are living within in New Zealand and Australia and in much of the imperial core. Is that this imperial system is benefiting from, the permanent war economy that the United States has created, including the genocide in Gaza. Like, being in the University Workers for Palestine group, we are trying to get our university pension fund to divest from um, you know, corporations that are profiting from the genocide in Gaza. And it is so difficult because if you look at the way that the global financial system has been set up under the leadership of these imperial core nations, it's so heavily integrated into the war economy that if you want to get returns for your pensions, these guys see that investing in the war economy is a necessity. So these media groups, they're friends with the billionaires. I was just reading about the new owner of NZ Herald. I think it was a couple of
NZME,
years. Yeah, some guy,
Yeah.
some billionaire or millionaire, multimillionaire,
billionaire.
who
Mm.
who evaded taxes and had a big court case against him in Canada, running here, and he somehow got citizenship here, or it's just crazy. So this is, the New Zealand media is captured by our economic system, which is a global imperial economic system, which profits from the permanent war economy, which is the way that the USA's economy runs. So this is all connected. It's not just about clicks. I
Oh no,
think
that's
that
just
if
a
they,
justification they give.
yeah,
It's not real.
Mm.
no, it's not real, because if you actually support Palestinians, people will click more, because that is where the people are. Working class people can recognize the struggle of normal people in other parts of the world, and they are very difficult, with so much effort. They are trying to divorce people from seeing the common struggle of working class people, ordinary people across the world. They're trying to create divisions by saying these people are terrorists, these people are primitive and backward, these people are, just Islamofascist. They just make something to create divisions among the global working class, and this is what the function of capitalist media is.
Yeah, and I think given the way that that operates in New Zealand in particular, you mentioned Grennan, the billionaire who's come over, and I think he's got a 15% stake or something in NZME now. And despite having like a relatively like it's not 50, he's been able to like clear the board out, like get some editorial stuff. This is a guy who for about 5 years, 3 to 5 years, was running these bizarre, what do you even call them? Like sock puppet media accounts called like The
Yeah.
Centrist or like Alternative Media New Zealand and shit like that, doing
Yeah.
conspiracy theory stuff and trying to boost it through Twitter and Facebook and the like. Just really odd stuff. This guy's a danger. Like I got to be really clear. This guy was doing this stuff, and it was still seen like as being a viable person to invest in NZME, and like obviously it's NZME. Like the New Zealand
Yeah, I
Herald
was
was
gonna say the
created.
bar is not,
Yeah, yeah.
super high,
The New Zealand
but
Herald was created to do war propaganda for
yeah.
atrocity against Maori during the New Zealand Wars, right? Like they've got a long
That's
history
right.
of allying with
Exactly.
the worst people.
Yeah.
Mm,
But given that this is such a small country with a small population, really centralized decision making and power that is easily manipulated by quite small amounts of cash. I want to be clear. Like,
disappointingly
corruption is,
small amounts of
yeah,
cash.
corruption is fucking cheap here. A national government has just lowered what they call the golden visa, like El Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, to $5 million from $15 million. $5 million of investment,
Mm.
heavy air quotes, can get you a golden visa into New Zealand now or very soon, aimed it seems to be at the United States. What the fuck do you think this is going to do to our democracy? Like, I don't
Yeah.
even
Wow.
want American leftists to be coming here in droves because they're cracked. They're like, they're so there's an ideological soup that they swim in that is counter to any kind of revolution. Like even some of the best, right? Like those people don't have like the good ones don't have $5 million. Sorry, American listeners, this is just true. And where do you think this money's going to go? Like we've seen that there's a pipeline being established between ACT and New Zealand First and even parts of National, where where someone invests in like Ryman Health or like another ex-national MP
Mm.
owned industry. Bill English has a few. Paula Bennett has some. She was head of Bailey's marketing and also the campaign manager for the last national campaign or something like that. Just this absurd shit. And then Bailey's gave the National Party money for anyway.
Yeah.
If there's a clear kickback system that's been set up. They're now announcing, hey, come over here if you're a United States person who wants to escape to New Zealand. Invest $5 million somewhere, wink, in the economy, and yay, you can be a citizen.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
Um,
that's really dangerous. Like,
and even without the kickbacks, it is bad. It is bad for people to just come over here and buy citizenship.
Yeah, I just
Um,
want to say one thing about this as well. It's mainly because I've got friends who work in like the ag tech and startup tech industry. So Erica Stanford has basically been doing press rounds at a bunch of ag tech events where she's been announcing this visa. And so
that's funny. I haven't seen much of that about that in the media.
in these talks specifically, apparently, according to a couple of my friends, and actually, I think you can actually look this up. I think reporters have quoted her on her saying this specifically. But she has mentioned that she is framing New Zealand as being a haven for investment for the likes of people from the US and Germany. So let's just take a let's just take a beat. I don't think I need to say the quiet part out loud here. Let's just take a beat. And I think if you're calling out to these people specifically,
As a
what
haven.
a haven. And you're announcing this scheme, and I think some detail here that might be important is that so it's $5 million if you invest in risky growth investments, and it's $10 million now if you invest in more balanced investments. So what that means for like I guess the average layperson is a risky investment is a thing like a startup, like a highly privatized, maybe majority internationally owned corporation. A balanced
mm,
investment is like stuff that's like stable, been in our economy for years, like maybe other wealth management, for example. So they're saying if you invest $5 million in riskier, I guess, like less regulatorily bound businesses in New Zealand, and you're from the US and Germany, we want you. They're also reducing the barriers around time spent in New Zealand and also reducing barriers around t taking an English language test. So instead of having to spend most of your time in this country to receive this visa for like at least when you're applying for it, they want to lower that requirement now. So essentially you could apply for this and you could have this process potentially while you were based elsewhere under extenuating circumstances. So let's think about that for a second. Let's
wow.
all sit with that knowledge.
Ginny, so what's this ag tech? You meant ag
Yeah,
tech?
sorry. So ag tech is like agriculture tech. So it's things like orchard management, it's things like growing fruits, growing crops, growing things that are essential to New Zealand's local
Right.
economy. And
Mm.
there's a bunch of startups from who have US or Canadian based founders, or even further afield, who are setting up these companies to, I guess, automate or create new processes around this tech in New Zealand, and essentially, in my mind, pushing out New Zealand suppliers, producers, and managers of resources like this. Yeah.
What I would like to say about this is obviously, crazy, and I agree with both of you here, but I think ultimately what this goes back to is this neoliberal logic that both Labour and national-led governments go ahead along with, which is that wealthy people are what will improve our country. So we just want to have more wealthy people coming in, and oh, no, no, we can't have a wealth tax because it will scare all the wealthy people away. And Labor says this as well when they are opposing, for example, any suggestion for a wealth tax from, parties like Green Party or Maori Party. They will say, no, no, this will scare the wealthy people. Let's just think about this for a moment here. Like you said, Ginny, what are these wealthy people who are going to come here with 10 million or 5 million? Are they here? Are they going to come here and join the working class movement for greater rights, to improve the health system, to improve the pension system, to improve the education? No, they're not. They're going
Mm.
to support the side that is fighting for the privatization of these services, right? Because how can you maximize profits? It's by investing in services and goods that are inelastic. The demand is always there. Housing, healthcare, these areas are always in demand. And if we privatize them, that's going to benefit people with money because they can just invest in those sectors and maximize profits. So wealthy people are not in the business of supporting working class interests, ordinary Kiwis' interests. Their interests are contradictory to common New Zealanders' interests. And this is something that both Labour, I think, National, obviously, they openly support the ruling class, so we can't expect anything. But Labour, come on. You know this. Why are you named Labour Party? It's because it began with the
It's just
understanding.
good branding. It's just good branding.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess so.
Just they just love the color red or something, like they're like, oh, that's chic. We'll just use that.
Let's take it back.
So, no, we must remember these wealthy people are against the interest of common, ordinary New Zealanders. They will use their wealth to lobby for policies that are in the interests of the wealthy and against the interests, the rights, the services, the public services and interests of common people. This is the
Mm.
fundamental principle of labor politics, which they have forgotten, unfortunately.
I'm waiting for the like, oh, the left are just anti-immigrant shit to drop from all the
Oh
neolibs, eh?
yeah, of course.
It's gonna be so funny. I remember talking about this end of 2024, I think, and I don't think I was cynical enough. Maybe you remember, Jenny. I think you might have been on one of the podcasts when we were recording about it, around how the national government was going to set up, like deregulate and set up a way for this kind of startup boom to happen here
Oh yeah,
to
I
so
was
they
on
could
that
make a claim about
episode.
the economy.
Yeah, yeah.
I thought it was probably going to happen in 2025. Like I said, that wasn't cynical enough.
No.
Um, it looks like what they're potentially doing is setting up a system where basically someone can set up a pump and dump crypto startup and have people buy into it and boost the New Zealand economy. And we're going to see this
Wow.
little uptick in GDP. And National will say, oh look, you just needed to give us time, and now we're in recovery. You don't want to fuck it up now. And if that happens, and also if it is like that, the media are absolutely going to just be jacking themselves raw about it. I want to be really clear about that because we've seen that kind of rhetoric occurring even without a recovery, even with things being as bad as they are.
Yeah,
The media, the gallery, the political gallery in particular, have
yeah,
been so in the bag. All the economists, the
yeah,
bank economists, and like little startup economists saying like, oh yeah, like willfully misreading numbers to make claims about employment. Like, oh, these
yeah,
unemployment numbers are good actually. Excuse me?
yeah.
Like,
No,
not even take
100.
into account the 120,000 people who have left to Australia.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's like a concerted effort, at least in terms of like to give like a soft landing to things like AI companies, to things like people who want to do crypto schemes. And like I've been hearing a little bit about how what would be really great for jobs, which is what Amazon used to say, would be building a data center, like a bigger data center in New Zealand.
We've
Right? It's
never
like
been able
there
to
would
do it, by the
No.
way.
what if we had a open AI data center in New Zealand? Like, what if we had a thing here that supported a really, really big, more ethical chat GPT source or solution than open? What if we had Claude or Anthropic in this country? Would that make a difference or help? And it's like, think for a second. No,
I think that
absolutely not.
the AI centers are like military bases. We need to treat them with the same level of seriousness because
Hmm.
this is so much integrated into the US Department of War
Hmm.
and Pentagon and things. Yeah, we
Hmm.
need a nationwide uprising if they are planning to do something like that. We can't allow it because it's a question of sovereignty. We shouldn't be allowing
Well,
it.
this is something that friend of the cast, Olivia Gittell, has said like multiple times, right? Has done he's academic writing about it. It's blockchain
Hmm.
imperialism, it's
Hmm.
crypto colonialism. Like
Hmm.
it's the use of financial systems and digital systems to impose costs and necessities on states
Yeah.
in ways that pull them back into the imperial system. It's yeah, horrific. And
And
very
just
obvious and not talked about.
And just think about how easy it would be for all the people implicated in this Epstein crimes to get a golden visa in New Zealand with
No,
this new scheme.
stop, Josephine. Yeah, yeah, I
God,
mean, this is it, right?
no.
You're right.
Yeah.
It's crazy. This is the culture of the ruling class. It is the most depraved. Everything, like you know how they this when we think about colonization, we need to think about it, as something driven by the ruling class rather than the working class, which is what it
Yeah.
is.
Hmm.
And they say that people in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Pacific, Maori are primitive, savages, cannibals, all these things. They are projecting. They are the ones who have all those features, and they were projecting it onto the people of the world in order to exploit their resources and labor, in order to own and capture the productive capacities of the world, the minerals, the labor, and everything. So, these are our enemies. And we cannot welcome them into New Zealand. We cannot welcome them into Aotearoa.
Absolutely. And I mean, that should be obvious, right? That should be a clear decision to make. Um, but once again, it's shown that the powerful in the form of politicians and the decision makers for like what this country does and their allies and the media and in business and etc. are just so far away from the electorate at this point. And they're only hanging on by a thread and by their full press control of the narrative because, like any reasonable person, and even many unreasonable people, look at stuff like the Epstein files and make the correct conclusion that, oh, this is actually just what all these people are like, and we probably shouldn't give them things or let them have control of the narrative or let them have control of our policies and our governments. But instead, the politicians go the other way, and this kind of thing just materially it'll end badly for them. It's just about the amount of damage that happens before that at this
Hmm.
point. Like you can't keep being this far away from the people you're meant to be representing. Like it doesn't work as a system. Like it tends swiftly towards fascism because and you're seeing it in Australia right now. We talk about the imperial boomerang or whatever. This force has to be applied to their own people. To not their own
That's
people because
right.
their own people are the imperial hegemony, right? But to the people that they're meant to be representing. And then that just leads to eventual revolution or extinction. That's it. Like, those are the only choices when you've got that amount of dissonance between those two things. One last topic I wanted to cover off, but Josephine, you look like you're about to jump in.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say like 5 million for Trump or Trump's family is pocket change for,
Hmm.
for all these billionaires, whether Jeff Bezos and that. 5 million is pocket change for them. It's like a bunch of coins. It's dangerous. We don't want these people here. Anyway,
Yeah.
sorry.
We've
Going
also
on.
seen like there's a recent report saying that the overseas vote is going to be pretty important in 2026. Interesting.
Great.
Not saying
Yeah.
that's what leading. I don't think they're like thinking that far ahead. I don't think they're like incredible electoral strategists or anything. Their goals have been to suppress the vote, right? That's what the National Party is doing. It's just interesting that like Yeah, anyway, final thing for the topic, for the podcast is, and it swings us all the way back to what we started out with, this absolutely ludicrous decision by the National Coalition to approve the construction of a gas import terminal in Taranaki to the cost of $1 billion or more. This is something we don't need, we don't want, has a terrible cost benefit analysis. Um, but very interestingly, the main supplier of this particular kind of gas is the United States. And
Wow.
even more interestingly, that $1 billion plus is about the same amount as the bribe we decided not to give to Trump just 2 weeks ago to join the Board of Peace.
Oh
And
no.
like, and you know, we're talking about energy sovereignty earlier.
Yeah,
This
that's
is
fair.
this is giving that away. This is intentionally tying ourselves to an incredibly volatile US market and US set of
Mhm.
decision making, and not just in terms of the economics of it, but in terms of what their regime decides to do. We have seen some things happen in the last few years that should have, under any reasonable circumstances, led to the US just being cut off by multiple countries. I'm thinking of stuff like the Pentagon turning off the guidance systems for Ukraine's jets. You know, like that level of integration with US systems is used as a very tight leash,
Mm.
even and up to the point of countries that they are meant to be allied with and they're meant to be helping defend, turning off their ability to defend themselves. Like this
Yeah.
is, like, why do we want to do this? There is no reason. Everyone's come out and said this is not going to work. We don't need this. This is an insane thing to spend money on. They're saying they're going to fund it with a levy. Like the conversation is somehow, oh, that's actually a tax, blah 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 blah. That's not
Yeah.
the
It will
important
be a
question here.
tax.
Who gives a shit?
Wow.
Like I don't care. Like personally, if this is a good thing, I don't care about paying more money to build decent
Mm.
infrastructure, right? Like, but
Mm.
it's been bogged down in that, and the question of energy sovereignty has just gone out the window. Like,
Mm.
Yeah.
where is the LNG coming from? What are we gonna do with it? Like, yo,
No, I was gonna say like just to Josephine's point, like that really is the thing that scares me the most is that at no point was there, it looks like there was no discussion at all around New Zealand's energy sovereignty at all in this piece. They were like, okay, we're commissioning a report to tell us what's good about LNG. We've got the report that says what's good about LNG and that it's gonna bring us 3,000 jobs or something like that by 20, it'll help us keep something like 3,000 jobs by 2035, allegedly. And so they're going, okay, great. We love that. And I'm like, just saying 3,000 jobs, not just needs at that figure in terms of like individual employment, but that is a drop in the bucket for the lives that are going to be affected by this change, right? It's completely ridiculous. And I think the main questions around this have not just been the impacts for us financially, but also environmentally. Like basically regasifying LNG, it could potentially be worse than coal, right? Like distributing it, the fact that it leaks when you're shipping it around to places, all the things they have to do to actually make it usable for electricity in the country that it arrives in are just ridiculous. And everything you said about how Cuba and Venezuela were suffering so much because of things like United States driven embargo rulings and regulations. Like my nightmare scenario is that we eventually do become reliant on LNG produced from the US and that a single protester says something which Trump doesn't like, or whichever governing body at the time is around doesn't like. And then our people have no control over our own natural resources, and we basically get starved to death if we don't comply with what the imperialist regime wants us to say.
Yeah, at least put in a very, very disempowering position, right?
Yeah.
Um, the basic material needs that a country needs are there's no debate on that. We need to have security on that, or assurances and guarantees, and partner with actual good countries that are trustable, right?
Mm.
But more than when I first heard this, like Taranaki, right? Taranaki is sitting near Parihaka. This is unceded Maori land, and this is
Mm.
ongoing colonization. This is an example of how colonization continues on these lands. And that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect of it is also looking at the last decade or so of what the United States has been doing in its foreign policy has been around this, it's newly discovered LNG over the last, I think it's last couple of decades. They've discovered this resource, and they've discovered that they have a lot of it and they want other countries to buy it. And you just think about how US foreign policy is driven not democratically, but by the interests of these petroleum, oil giant, LNG giants, gas giants. And they're forcing this on the rest of the world. You can see that, some analysts, including, work done by journalists like Seymour Hersh, talking about how the Ukraine war, how it links to the energy agreements between Europe and Russia, the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines, and how that affected working class people in Europe,
Well,
and
that's also
how
led to the UK being now reliant on the US for energy.
yes. So the whole of Europe has now become worse off because of this, what USA engineered there in terms of precipitating that war for over a decade there in Ukraine. So this is all connected. We see all these pieces coming together where United States is basically just shaping their foreign policy based on their permanent war economy. So that's the military industrial complex, but also their oil and gas sector, which is crazy.
And I think in this case as well, I've heard Luxon, I think, use the words energy security, but no one's asking him
No.
what that means or how. Like, okay, then why aren't we doing more renewables? Because $1 billion into renewables
Yeah.
would go a long way to doing that, I think. And it's also turned out that this is such a, I guess, risky idea that it's going to have to be fast-tracked over the top of the fast-track bill, which
Which
was
is
created
ludicrous. Yeah.
for pushing through these horrible kinds of projects that would have severe like ramifications for the country. This would not meet guidelines for being used with the bill that this
Mhm.
coalition created to do these kind of things without oversight. That's how bad this is. It doesn't even like work within their own strategy. And
Mhm.
it's out of the blue as well. It's just like, and you just know that it has also to do with the critical resources deal that we talked about last week, right? With US extraction of critical resources from New Zealand. That was We just happened to find out that there's been these secret meetings. This is part of that same thing. You're an outpost of US empire, and we're gonna take what we want. We're gonna take what we want. Any final words on this before we wrap it up, Ginny?
No, I've just been reading more about the LNG stuff and it's making me depressed. But it's
Wonderful way
just
to end.
no, but I just wanted to, one last note on that is that they think that it's actually unlikely that we're going to be able to get any plants online quicker than 2029 because we just don't have the scale of
Yeah.
storage or technology required enough to build that in New Zealand currently.
And the Minister Watts is lying. He's saying, "Oh yeah, we can build it in a year." Bullshit. Like
Yeah.
they're trying to lock the funding in and start construction before the election so that they can make sure it can't be changed. Josephine, anything final from you?
Well, there's some US warplanes being stationed in Christchurch today, so I'm gonna go to the protest. It's at 11 today, so I'm headed
Yes.
there. I just have one thing to say, which is one of the first lines in Spanish I learned when I arrived in Cuba, and it's abajo el imperialismo, which means down with imperialism.
Fantastic.
Incredible.
So when you say abajo el imperialismo, the crowd responds abajo. Okay, so I'm going to say that abajo el
Mhm.
imperialismo.
Abajo.
Abajo.
Yay!
And you can take that to marches, everyone who's listening.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening today. Thank you to my co-hosts for joining us for this energy sovereignty special, where all the current events have just happened to line up with that this week somehow. Like, share, subscribe. Head up Common Sense. It's got the gig guide in there. It's got the roundup of kind of progressive news, things you need to know about the politics of this country. It'll be dropping onto the website every Saturday morning. So bookmark that and pass it around. We think that there are still some good stories being told out there. Let's try and funnel people to those stories and prove that actually you do get clicks for good stuff. not just for snuff videos, which it seems like NZME and Stuff NZ are trying to push. We'll catch you next week.
If artificers are denied, living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road's upon now. It's paved with good intentions, and I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when they criticism cost me ought to stay. 'Cause I live amongst the people every day. This vindictive, forgetful fucking rain. It feels like we're